he bought a cheap ship, then heard a woman crying from inside the hull. The auction house stank of hydraulic fluid and desperation. Silas ran his hand along the rusted hull plating of Lot 47, feeling the micrometeorite pockmarks beneath his calloused fingers. The freighter squatted in Bay 12 like a dying animal, her registration plates so corroded he couldn't make out the original name. Paint peeled in long strips from her sides, exposing structural supports that had seen better decades. She was ugly, unwanted, and exactly what he needed. Going once at 4,000 credits, the auctioneer's voice crackled through the overhead speakers, distorted by interference from the station's aging communication system. Silas did the mental math again. Hull integrity at 60% according to the preliminary scans. Engines probably shot to hell, but the frame was solid Terran steel from the pre-Alliance era, when they still built ships to last. He could part her out for 15, maybe 20,000 if he got lucky with the drive core. The reactor alone might fetch 5 if it wasn't completely dead. Even the scrap metal would bring in decent credits at current market rates. 4,000 going twice. He raised his paddle, feeling the weight of the decision. This purchase would drain most of his savings, leave him vulnerable if anything went wrong. But that was the salvage business, calculated risks and educated guesses. Sometimes you won. Sometimes you lost everything. Sold to bidder 73. The Kyra trader beside him made a clicking sound of disgust, his mandibles quivering with annoyance. The insectoid's compound eyes reflected Silas's image 100 times over. You overpaid for scrap, human, the Kyra said, his translator rendering the clicks and whistles into flat, emotionless standard. Maybe, Silas said, signing the transfer documents on his datapad. The screen flashed green, confirming the transaction and transferring ownership to his name. But it's my scrap now. 3 hours later, he floated through the freighter's main airlock, his helmet lamp cutting through decades of accumulated dust. Particles danced in the beam like microscopic stars, disturbed for the first time in years. The ship groaned around him, her bones settling in the station's artificial gravity after so long in the cold dark. Every surface told a story of neglect, control panels dark and dead, corridors thick with frost from atmosphere leaks that had frozen and thawed 100 times. Conduits hung loose from ceiling mounts, swaying gently in the recycled air, now flowing through the vents. He worked his way aft, cataloging salvageable components with practiced efficiency. The galley yielded nothing but corroded appliances and broken dishes. Crew quarters were stripped bare, even the mattresses removed by previous owners trying to recoup their losses. The bridge was a disaster of shattered screens and torn-out wiring. Someone had gutted her systematically, taking anything of immediate value. He was about to head back to his transport when he heard it. A sound faint, almost like. Silas stopped, his breath loud in the helmet. There, again. A rhythmic thumping coming from below the deck plates, transmitted through the ship's metal skeleton. "Ship's settling," he muttered to himself, but his hand moved to the plasma cutter on his belt anyway. His instincts had kept him alive this long. He wasn't about to ignore them now. The sound came again. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. Not settling. Not the random creaks and pops of metal adjusting to temperature changes or gravity shifts. A pattern. Deliberate. He followed it to a sealed maintenance hatch near the aft cargo hold, its edges welded shut with amateur work that left visible scorch marks. The metal still showed discoloration from excessive heat. Someone had wanted this closed, wanted it to stay closed, wanted anyone looking to assume there was nothing below worth finding. The plasma cutter made short work of the welds, the blue-white beams slicing through the crude repairs like butter. The hatch swung open with a groan of protest, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. The thumping grew louder, more insistent. "This is stupid," Silas said to the empty corridor. "This is how people die in horror vids." He climbed down anyway. The subdeck was a maze of pipes and conduits, never meant for human occupation. The designers had packed every millimeter with systems and infrastructure, leaving barely enough space to crawl. He had to move sideways through gaps barely wide enough for his shoulders, following that persistent sound. His lamp caught tangles of cable, junction boxes covered in warning labels, coolant pipes dripping condensation that had frozen into weird icicle formations. The thumping came from ahead, beyond a turn in the corridor. His heart hammered against his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to turn back, to leave, whatever this was alone. But he'd never been good at listening to the sensible part of his brain. He rounded the corner and stopped. A bulkhead that shouldn't exist cut across the corridor like a wall of steel, welded into place with the same amateur technique as the hatch above. This wasn't original construction. Someone had added it later, sealing off this section completely, and set into it a window. Small, reinforced plexiglass scratched and clouded with age. Silas pressed his face to the glass, wiping away decades of grime with his glove. A cryo-pod. Active, its status lights blinking green in the darkness, powered by some independent source that had kept it running all these years. The gel inside glowed faintly with bioluminescence, and inside the pod, his heart stopped. A woman. Her skin held an iridescent quality, shifting between pearl and violet in the pod's dim light, catching and refracting the colors in ways human skin never could. High cheekbones, full lips, features that were almost human, but not quite, the proportions slightly elongated, the angles more refined. Her hair floated in the suspension gel, long and silver white, spreading around her head like a halo. She wore a thin bodysuit that left little to his imagination. The fabric clinging to curves that made his mouth go dry despite the recycled air in his helmet. Her eyes were closed, but her hand three-fingered, elegant, with an extra joint in each digit, pressed against the interior of the pod. As he watched, she made a fist and struck the glass. Thump, thump, thump. She was awake, conscious, had been conscious this whole time, trapped in that gel, unable to move or speak or scream. Just hitting the glass over and over, hoping someone would hear. Jesus Christ, Silas breathed, his voice cracking. How long had she been in there? Days, weeks. The active status lights suggested the pod had power, which meant life support was functioning. But that didn't mean she was comfortable. Cryopods were designed for deep sleep, not extended consciousness. Being aware inside one would be torture. He moved along the bulkhead, searching frantically for access. His lamp swept across the steel, catching nothing but welds and rivets. There had to be a way in. Had to be. There, a control panel, its display dark, but the manual release lever clearly marked with faded yellow and black hazard stripes. His fingers found the lever and pulled. Nothing happened. Hang on, he said, knowing she couldn't hear him through the plexiglass and her helmet. I'm getting you out. The lever resisted, corroded in place after years of neglect. He threw his weight against it, feet bracing against the bulkhead. Metal screamed in protest. Something gave with a crack that echoed through the corridor. The pod's seal broke with a hiss of escaping gel. Emergency vents engaged, evacuating the liquid through drains built into the pod's base. The woman's eyes snapped open violet, with vertical pupils that contracted sharply in the sudden light from his helmet lamp. She convulsed forward as the pod's front panel swung open, gel pouring from her mouth as she tried to breathe. Silas caught her as she spilled out, her body cold and trembling, her weight almost toppling them both. She clung to him with surprising strength, her three-fingered hands gripping his suit. Easy, he said, trying to sound calm despite his racing heart. Easy, I've got you. You're safe now. She looked up at him, those alien eyes wide and terrified, and searching his face through his helmet's faceplate. Her lips moved, forming words in a language he didn't recognize. The sounds were melodic, flowing, nothing like any human tongue. The translator implant in his ear crackled, processing, searching its database for a match. Then, please, she whispered, her voice rendered in accented standard. Please, don't let them find me. Her eyes rolled back. She went limp in his arms, unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady. Silas stood there for a moment, holding an alien woman who'd been trapped in a cryopod on a ship he'd bought for scrap, trying to process what the hell had just happened to his nice, simple salvage operation. Well, he said to the empty corridor, this complicates things. He carried her through the ship's corridors, her weight barely registering despite her height. She was taller than a human woman, maybe 6 feet, but slender in ways that suggested either natural physiology or long-term muscle atrophy from the pod. Her skin was cool to the touch, her breathing shallow. The bodysuit she wore was some kind of adaptive material, already adjusting to the ambient temperature and warming against his chest, getting her back to his transport. And then to his quarters on the station took careful planning. He couldn't exactly walk through the main corridors carrying an unconscious alien woman without attracting attention. So he used the maintenance passages, the cargo lifts, the routes salvagers knew that avoided security checkpoints and curious eyes. His quarters on Outpost 17 were small, a bunk barely wide enough for two, a desk cluttered with datapads and component catalogs, a bathroom barely larger than a closet. The walls were bare metal, the floor cheap composite that had cracked in 3 places. He'd lived here for 2 years and never bothered to make it feel like home. Home was wherever his ship was docked. He laid her on the bed and cranked the heat, watching her shiver. The bodysuit had sealed itself completely now, covering her from neck to toe in form-fitting material that looked like liquid metal. It left absolutely nothing to the imagination. Silas forced himself to look away and focus on practical matters. The med scanner on his wall had seen better days. He'd bought it third-hand from a station medic who'd been upgrading, but it still worked. He waved it over her, watching the readout with growing confusion. Her biology was close to human. Too close, but different in subtle ways that the scanner struggled to categorize. Dual circulatory system with separate pathways for oxygenated and deoxygenated blood. Denser bone structure, maybe 20% heavier than human equivalent. Body temperature 10 degrees lower than human normal. 3-chambered heart instead of 4. Lungs with different alveoli structure, possibly more efficient oxygen exchange. And in the corner of the scan, a species identifier that made his blood run cold. Velarian, 99.7% confidence. No, Silas said aloud. That's not possible. Valeria had burned 30 years ago. Corporate wars over mining rights to the rich asteroid fields in their system. Negotiations had broken down. Vex Corporation and Hellion Dynamics had turned the dispute into open warfare. The planet had been glassed from orbit, every city reduced to melted slag. The atmosphere so poisoned it would take centuries to recover. Every member of the species presumed dead, casualties of corporate greed and political posturing. Been 8 years old when it happened. He remembered the broadcasts, the footage of mushroom clouds blooming across Valeria's surface. He remembered the debates in Congress about intervention, about sanctions, about whether Earth should risk war with 2 megacorporations to save an alien species. Earth had voted to stay neutral. By the time the United Nations finally authorized military action, there was nothing left to save. Just ash and glass and bodies floating in the ruins of orbital habitats. The woman on his bed stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She stared at the ceiling for a moment, her expression blank. Then awareness returned, and she jolted upright, her hand going to her throat as if checking that she could breathe. "You're safe," Silas said quickly, raising his hands in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "You're in my quarters on Outpost 17. I'm not going to hurt you." She turned her head to look at him, those violet eyes assessing. Her gaze swept the room, cataloging exits and potential threats with the efficiency of someone who'd been hunted before. "You're human," she said. The translator rendered her voice smooth, melodic, with an accent he couldn't place. "Yeah, you opened the pod. Yeah." She sat up slowly, testing her limbs. The bodysuit shifted with her movements, maintaining coverage while somehow making her more alluring. Her movements were careful, controlled, someone relearning their body after long disuse. "Where are we?" Her gaze returned to him, steady and evaluating. "Outpost 17. Salvage yard in the Kepler system. You were in a ship I bought at auction." He stayed by the door, giving her space, trying not to seem threatening. "What's your name?" She hesitated, and he saw the calculation in her eyes. Trust was a commodity she couldn't afford to waste. "Kyra," she said finally. "I'm Silas." He gestured at the med scanner display, still showing her readings. "That says you're Velarian." "I am." No hesitation this time, just flat acknowledgement. "Valeria is gone. Destroyed 30 years ago." "I know." Her voice carried a weight that made his chest ache, grief compressed into 2 words. "I was off-world when it happened, on Terminus Station, negotiating a mining contract. When I heard the news, I tried to return. By the time I arrived," she closed her eyes and he saw her jaw tighten. Nothing but ash and glass and bodies floating in the dark. The orbital platforms had been destroyed. The colonies on the moons were gone. Everything. "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, too small for the magnitude of her loss. An entire species, an entire world erased. "Are you?" Her eyes opened, fixing him with a stare that felt like it reached inside him and examined what it found there. "Your species voted not to help. Earth watched us burn and did nothing." The accusation hit like a physical blow. He'd been a child, powerless to change anything, but that didn't make the guilt less real. "I was a kid. I didn't have a vote. I didn't." "I'm not angry at you, Silas." She stood, and he realized again how tall she was, meeting his eyes despite his 6-foot frame. "I'm simply stating fact. Your people chose to let mine die. Earth decided that maintaining good relations with Vex and Hellion was more important than preventing genocide." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with truth. "What happened after?" Silas asked, needing to fill the silence. "How did you end up in that pod?" Kyra moved to the small window, looking out at the station's docking bays. Ships came and went in the distance, their running lights cutting through the darkness. She watched them for a long moment before speaking. "I had information, data about old colonies, settlement patterns from before the Alliance was formed, archaeological evidence of civilizations that shouldn't exist according to official histories. There were people who wanted it, corporations, governments, but they didn't want to pay what it was worth. Her hand touched the glass, her 3 fingers spreading against the cool surface. So they decided to take me instead, locked me in that pod, meant to keep me frozen until they needed what was in my head, until they were ready to extract it. Extract it. Silas felt his stomach turn. You mean, kill me, yes. Pull apart my brain, recover the data through autopsy. She said it matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. But the ship changed hands before they could. Some legal dispute over ownership. Then it was sold at auction, bought by someone who stripped it for parts and sold it again. Each time, I heard them through the pod. Voices fatting in and out. Footsteps above my head. The sound of machinery being removed. You were conscious the whole time. Yes, she turned to face him, and he saw something break in her expression. 4 years, 3 months, 17 days. I counted every moment, every hour, every minute. I tried to sleep, but the pod wouldn't let me, some malfunction in the sedation system. So I just existed, in the dark, alone, unable to move, unable to scream. 4 years. Silas tried to imagine it and couldn't. 4 years of being trapped in your own body, aware, but helpless, hoping someone would find you, but knowing each day that passed made it less likely. 4 years of slowly losing hope. I thought I would die there, Kyra continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought I would run out of air or power, or something would fail, and I'd just stop. And no one would ever know what happened to me. The last Velarian, dead in a pod on a forgotten ship. He wanted to touch her, to offer comfort, but kept his distance. She'd been through enough without him invading her space. You're safe now, he said. I swear it. Am I? She studied him, her head tilting slightly in a gesture that might have been curiosity or skepticism. If people learn I survived, they'll come for me, for what I know. I'm valuable, Silas, dead or alive. And there are plenty of people who would prefer dead. Then we don't tell them. The decision came easily, instinctively. You stay here. We'll figure out new identity papers, get you documented as something else. There are ways around the system. You would hide me, risk yourself for a stranger. You've been through enough, Silas said, and no one deserves what happened to you. No one deserves any of it. Something changed in her expression, a softening around her eyes. The defensive walls came down just slightly, letting him see the person beneath the survivor's armor. She crossed the room in 3 fluid strides and stood before him. Her hand rose, those 3 elegant fingers brushing his cheek with a touch light as breath. Her skin was smooth, cool, and he felt his heart rate kick up. You're not what I expected, she said softly, her voice carrying notes the translator couldn't quite capture. What did you expect? Humanity to be as cold as their politicians. Her fingers traced his jawline, following the line of stubble he hadn't bothered to shave in days. But you're warm, so warm, his breath caught in his throat. This close, he could see the fine patterns in her skin, iridescent scales, almost too small to perceive individually. They caught the light and refracted it, creating subtle rainbows that shifted with her breathing. Her scent reminded him of rain on metal, clean and sharp, and somehow intoxicating. "Kyra, don't," she said, her thumb brushing across his lower lip. "Don't say this is complicated or that we shouldn't. Don't tell me all the reasons this is a bad idea. I've spent 4 years in a prison of my own thoughts, 4 years with nothing but fear and darkness and loneliness. Let me have this moment of feeling something other than fear. Let me feel alive again." Her lips found his. The kiss was electric, her mouth cool against his heat, the temperature difference creating sensation that sparked down his spine. She tasted like the suspension gel, slightly metallic, slightly sweet, and underneath, that's something uniquely her. Her hands slid up his chest, feeling the planes of muscle through his shirt, mapping his body with careful exploration. He pulled her closer, his hands spanning her waist, feeling how slender she was beneath the bodysuit. She made a sound against his mouth, something between a sigh and a purr that vibrated in her chest. Her body pressed against his, curves yielding to his hardness, fitting together in ways that felt right despite their physiological differences. Silas broke the kiss. His breathing ragged, giving her one last chance to reconsider. "Are you sure about this?" "I haven't been sure of anything in years," Kyra said, her pupils blown wide, the violet irises reduced to thin rings. "But I'm sure of this. I need this. I need to feel something good. Please." She pulled his shirt over his head, her eyes drinking in his form with undisguised hunger. Her fingers traced old scars, proof of a life spent in dangerous work. A long line across his ribs from a hull breach that had nearly killed him. Burn marks on his shoulder from a plasma torch accident. The puckered circle of a bullet wound below his collarbone from a salvage dispute that had turned violent. When she found the jagged line across his ribs, she bent and pressed her lips to it, kissing the old wound with a tenderness that made his throat tight. The sensation made him gasp. Her mouth moved across his skin, mapping him with kisses, learning his body through touch and taste. He threaded his fingers through her hair, marveling at its silken texture. It felt like liquid metal, cool and smooth, and impossibly fine. "Your turn," he said, voice rough with desire. The bodysuit had no visible fasteners, no zippers or buttons or seams. But when he touched it with clear intent, the material responded, peeling away like liquid mercury, retreating from his fingers. Kyra shrugged it off with a roll of her shoulders, and it pooled at her feet like spilled silver. She stood before him unashamed, letting him look his fill. She was beautiful. Alien, yes, but beautiful in ways that made human standards seem limiting and provincial. Her breasts were fuller than the bodysuit had suggested, tipped with nipples that gleamed faint violet, and seemed to harden under his gaze. Her waist tapered to hips made for his hands, the curve of her body a study in elegant proportions. Her skin held that iridescent quality everywhere, scales catching the light and creating patterns that shifted as she breathed. Between her thighs, he glimpsed folds that promised mysteries he desperately wanted to explore. "You're starring," Kyra said, but she smiled, pleased by his reaction. "Can you blame me?" His voice came out hoarse. No, she reached for his belt, her three-fingered hands surprisingly dexterous as they worked the buckle. "But I want to see all of you. It's only fair." They fell onto the bed together, a tangle of limbs and heat and desperate need. Silas kissed her throat, tasting salt and something else, something uniquely her. She arched beneath him, her hands mapping the muscles of his back, tracing the valleys between them. His hand slid between her legs, finding her slick and ready. Her anatomy was slightly different, more forward, easier to access, and the bundle of nerves he sought was larger than in human women, more sensitive. When he stroked it with careful pressure, she cried out, her back bowing off the bed. "Silas," she gasped, his name transformed by her accent into something exotic. "Stars, Silas." He worked her slowly, learning what made her breath hitch, what made her nails dig into his shoulders, what made her hips buck against his hand. She was incredibly responsive, her whole body singing under his touch, every nerve ending alive after years of forced numbness. When she came, she pulled him down into a kiss that tasted like starlight and desperation, her internal muscles clenching rhythmically around his fingers. "I need you," she whispered against his mouth when she could speak again. "Please, I need to feel you inside me." He positioned himself between her thighs, the head of his erection pressing against her entrance. He hesitated, suddenly aware of how different they were, worried about hurting her. If this is wrong, it's not. Her legs wrapped around his waist, heels pressing into the small of his back. "It's the first right thing in years. Please, Silas." He entered her slowly, giving her time to adjust. She was tight, hot despite her cooler body temperature, her internal temperature higher than her skin. She took him in increments, her body stretching to accommodate him, until he was fully seated inside her. They stayed like that for a moment, joined completely, staring into each other's eyes. Silas saw tears on her cheeks and wiped them away with his thumb. "Did I hurt you?" "No," she smiled through the tears. I didn't think I'd ever feel this again. Feel anything good again." He kissed her softly, then began to move. Slow at first, gentle, learning the rhythm she needed. She moved with him, meeting each thrust with a roll of her hips that drove him wild. Her internal muscles gripped him in ways human anatomy couldn't match, rippling along his length with each stroke. They built together, finding a pace that worked for both of them. Silas lost himself in the feel of her, the sound of her pleasure, the way she whispered his name like a prayer in her own language. When she came again, tightening around him with enough force to make him see stars. He followed her over the edge, his release hitting him like a freight train. After they lay tangled together, his hand tracing idle patterns on her skin. The iridescent scales felt smooth beneath his fingers, almost frictionless. "What happens now?" Kyra asked, her head resting on his chest. "I don't know," Silas admitted, "but we'll figure it out together." She curled against him, seeking his warmth. "Tell me about Earth. I've never been there." So he did. He told her about blue skies that went on forever, and oceans so vast you couldn't see the other side. He described forests that stretched from horizon to horizon, billions of trees creating ecosystems that had evolved over millennia. He talked about his childhood in New Seattle, working his father's salvage business from the time he was old enough to hold a wrench. He described the smell of pine trees after rain, the taste of real coffee, the sound of seagulls at the harbor. "It sounds beautiful," Kyra said when he finished. "It is. Maybe I'll take you there someday. Show you where humanity came from. Maybe." She was quiet for a moment, her fingers drawing abstract patterns on his chest. "Silas, the information I have, it's not just colony data. It's evidence. Proof that humanity didn't just join the galactic community 500 years ago. You founded it." He stilled, his hand stopping mid-caress. "What?" Kyra sat up, turning to face him fully. Her expression was serious, scholarly, the look of someone about to share a truth that would change everything. Oldest structures on Valeria, on a dozen other worlds scattered across this arm of the galaxy, they're human. Ancient, yes. Tens of thousands of years old, weathered by time and elements, but unmistakably human in design, in the mathematical principles underlying their construction, in the linguistic patterns carved into their foundations. She held his gaze. "Earth didn't first reach the stars 500 years ago, Silas. You've been out here far longer. Someone made your people forget." His mind reeled, rejecting the information, even as part of him recognized the truth in it. "That's impossible. We have records, archaeological evidence. The development of the warp drive, first contact with the Centauri." "All real," Kyra interrupted, "but not first contact. Recontact. Humanity returned to a galaxy you'd already explored and settled." She took his hand, squeezing gently. "I have the archaeological data. Gene sequences showing human DNA in alien populations that shouldn't be possible through natural evolution. Carbon dating placing human artifacts at 70,000 years old. Linguistic analysis showing that a dozen major languages have root structures derived from ancient Earth tongues. Why would anyone hide that? Who could? I don't know who orchestrated it, but I know why." Her jaw tightened, anger flickering across her features. "Power, control. The Alliance is built on the premise that humanity is new, junior members learning from established civilizations. If people knew humans built the foundation for everything, that you taught the Centauri warp theory and helped the Qresh develop their hive communication systems, that you were out here first, the entire political structure would collapse. So they buried it, made us forget our own history. Yes, and they killed anyone who came too close to the truth. Kyra's voice went hard, including my people. Valeria wasn't destroyed over mining rights, Silas. It was destroyed because we found evidence. Because we were about to go public with proof that humanity's legacy spans half the galaxy. Silas felt cold despite the warmth of her body against his. His entire species had been robbed of its legacy, forced to play the role of newcomers, while others ruled a civilization humans had built. Do you have proof? Real, verifiable proof? I have everything, stored in encrypted files, backed up in multiple locations. Survey data, excavation reports, genetic analysis, linguistic studies, decades of research by Velarian scientists who dedicated their lives to understanding the truth. She looked away. They all died when the planet burned. I'm all that's left of their work. Then we have to release it. Make it public. Get it to the media, the governments. They'll kill us first. Kyra turned back to him. The same people who destroyed my world will do whatever it takes to keep this secret. We'd be dead before the first report even published. Then we do it smart. Distribute it wide. Make it impossible to suppress. Flood every network, every database, every server we can access. Silas felt determination hardening in his chest. They can't kill everyone, and once the truth is out, there's no putting it back. It'll be dangerous. We'll be hunted. I know. You could walk away. Forget you ever found me. Sell the ship for scrap. Go back to your life. Her voice carried no judgment, just offering him an out. Not happening. Silas cupped her face, looking into those violet eyes. You've been alone long enough, and humanity deserves to know the truth about itself. Kyra searched his face for a long moment. Then she kissed him, pouring gratitude and hope and something that might have been love into it. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. Thank you, she whispered. Thank me when we're actually safe, and this is over. They spent the next hours planning. Kyra accessed her encrypted files through a secure terminal, showing him the evidence piece by piece. Images of massive stone complexes on dead worlds, their architecture unmistakably influenced by ancient Earth cultures. Genetic data showing chromosomes in alien species that had no evolutionary path except human genetic engineering. Radiocarbon dating results that placed human presence on 50 different worlds at dates that predated recorded history by tens of thousands of years. It was overwhelming, undeniable, proof that humanity had once dominated the stars, then somehow lost everything. What happened? Silas asked, staring at an image of what looked like a Sumerian ziggurat on a planet in the Carina arm. Why did we forget? Why did we lose all this? That's what we don't know, Kyra admitted. The archaeological record shows a sudden collapse about 70,000 years ago. Human settlements across the galaxy just stopped. No more construction, no more expansion. And then Earth went dark for millennia. When humanity finally reemerged, you had no memory of what came before. Someone did this to us, deliberately. That's what Velarian researchers believed. Some kind of forced regression, maybe a war that went badly, maybe a catastrophe we barely survived. But whatever happened, it was thorough. Your entire species was reduced to scattered tribes on a single planet, all your achievements erased. A proximity alert chimed from Silas's datapad, cutting through the conversation. He grabbed it, checking the display. His blood ran cold. We have a problem. What? Vex Corporation just flagged my ship purchase. They're sending security to inspect for. He looked at her, understanding crystallizing. For Velarian biosamples. They're looking for you. Kyra went pale, her skin losing its iridescent shimmer. They know I'm here. Not yet, but they will. Silas was already moving, pulling on clothes, grabbing his emergency pack. Credits, fake IDs, tools, everything he kept ready for the day he needed to run. How long? He checked the timestamp on the alert. 20 minutes, maybe less. Then we run. Kyra sealed herself back into the bodysuit, which adjusted to a more concealing configuration, adding a hood that shadowed her distinctive features. Where? I have a ship. Not the freighter, my personal transport, the Wanderer. She's fast, maneuverable. If we can get to her, we can make it to the outer rim before they organize a pursuit. He checked the corridor outside through his door camera. Clear, but that wouldn't last. Stay close. Don't talk to anyone. Try to look human. They moved through the station like ghosts, avoiding security checkpoints and crowded areas. Silas knew these corridors intimately after 2 years of residence, knew which cameras had blind spots and which maintenance passages connected to what. He guided them through a maze of service tunnels and cargo lifts, always staying one step ahead of the foot traffic. His heart hammered in his chest with each corner they turned. If they were caught, Kyra would disappear into a Vex Corporation lab, her body dissected for any biological advantage they could patent. He'd be lucky to end up in prison. More likely, they'd just make him disappear too. Another salvager who'd seen too much and asked too many. Continue. 11:16 a.m. Questions. His ship, the Wanderer, waited in Bay 6. She was small compared to the freighter, built for speed and maneuverability rather than cargo capacity. Her hull gleamed with recent maintenance, her engines humming with barely contained power. She was his pride and joy, bought with 5 years of salvage profits and modified with every credit he could spare. Silas ran through the pre-flight checklist, while Kyra sealed the airlock behind them, her 3-fingered hands moving across the controls with the confidence of someone who understood starship systems. You've flown before, he observed. Velarians are a spacefaring people. Were. Her voice caught on the correction. Every child learns basic ship operation. Then strap in and help me with the power distribution. I'm going to need every ounce of speed she's got." They worked together in practiced silence, bringing systems online one by one. Engines warmed up, shields initialized. Navigation plotted a course out of the system that took them away from major shipping lanes. "We're not going to make it," Kyra said suddenly, her eyes on the bay's external cameras. "They're here." 3 security vessels landed outside, their hulls bearing Vex Corporation colors and insignia. Armed troops in tactical gear poured out, weapons at the ready. They moved with military efficiency, establishing perimeter positions and preparing to breach the bay. Silas brought the Wanderer's engines to full power, the deck vibrating beneath his feet. "Oh, we're making it. Strap in tight." The ship leaped forward, shooting through the bay doors before they could fully close. Alarms shrieked throughout the station. The security vessels scrambled to follow, their engines flaring as they launched in pursuit. "They're locking weapons," Kyra said, reading the tactical display with the ease of someone who'd done this before. "I noticed." Silas threw the ship into a barrel roll, dodging the first barrage of pulse fire. Energy beams carved glowing lines through the dark, missing them by meters. "Hold on. This is going to get rough." He dove beneath the station's superstructure, using the massive structure as cover. The Wanderer was smaller and more agile than the security vessels, able to thread gaps they couldn't follow. Weapons fire scarred the station's hull, carving black streaks through metal and causing secondary explosions in exposed systems. One blast clipped their port side, sending the ship into an uncontrolled spin. Alarms blared. Silas fought the controls, using maneuvering thrusters to regain stability. "Shields are down to 60%, Kyra reported, her hands flying across the co-pilot's controls. "Rerouting power from life support. You know your way around a ship. I wasn't always a researcher." She diverted more power, buying them precious seconds. 3 years in the Velarian defense fleet before I went academic. They burst into open space, the security vessels right behind them. Silas aimed for the asteroid field that ringed the system, dangerous navigation even with modern sensors. But their pursuers would have to follow or lose them. "This is insane," Kyra said, but she was smiling, adrenaline overriding fear. "You have a better idea." "No, this is perfect." They plunged into the asteroid field. Silas flew on instinct honed by years of navigating debris fields and salvage sites, threading gaps that seemed too narrow to exist. The Wanderer responded to his touch like an extension of his body, banking and rolling with grace that belied her small size. Behind them, one security vessel clipped a tumbling rock the size of a house. The impact sheared off its starboard engine. It spun out of control, exploding in a brief flower of flame that died almost instantly in the vacuum. The remaining 2 fell back, unwilling to risk pursuit through the dense field. Their commanders weren't paid enough to die chasing a salvager and his mysterious passenger. Hours later, they sat in the wanderer's small cabin, the adrenaline finally fatting from their systems. Silas's hands still shook slightly as he plotted their next jump. Kyra watched him from the co-pilot's seat, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything. Thank me when we're actually safe, and this nightmare is over. Where are we going?" Silas pulled up a star chart, highlighting a system in the outer rim. "I know some people, smugglers mostly, but they're good people who owe me favors. We can get new identities there, better equipment, access to secure networks." He glanced at her. "And we can start working on releasing your data. If we're going to expose this conspiracy, we need to be smart about it. You believe me now about humanity's legacy. I believe someone wants you dead badly enough to send armed troops after us within hours of finding you. That's enough." He reached across the narrow space between their seats, taking her hand. The three-fingered grip felt natural now. "Besides, I want to know what else they're hiding. What else they've taken from us." Kyra squeezed his fingers, her skin cool against his warmth. "This won't be safe. We'll be hunted for the rest of our lives. I know. You could still leave me somewhere. Drop me at a colony world. Give yourself plausible deniability. You didn't know what you were carrying. You panicked when security came." "Not happening," Silas interrupted firmly. "We're in this together now." "Why?" She searched his face, seeking understanding. "You barely know me. We met hours ago. Why risk everything?" Silas thought about that question. About the woman he'd found in a pod, conscious and alone for 4 years. About the kiss that had felt like coming home to a place he'd never been. About the way she'd moved through the crisis with calm competence, never panicking, always thinking. About violet eyes that had seen too much suffering and still held hope. "Because," he said finally, "I've spent my whole life digging through trash and wreckage, looking for something valuable, something worth keeping. And I finally found it." Kyra's eyes widened, her breath catching. Then she was out of her seat and across the cabin, kissing him with an intensity that stole his breath and made his head spin. They stumbled toward the sleeping alcove, hands already working at clothing. This time, their lovemaking was urgent, almost desperate. The fear of the chase, the adrenaline of near death, all translated into raw need. Silas took her against the wall of the alcove, her legs wrapped around his waist as he drove into her. She bit his shoulder to muffle her cries, her nails leaving marks on his back. Harder, she gasped between thrusts. Silas harder. He obliged, his hands gripping her thighs hard enough to bruise, his hips snapping forward with enough force to shake them both. She was perfect around him, hot and tight, and taking everything, he gave her with enthusiasm that matched his own. When they came, it was together, their voices mingling in the small space, her name on his lips and his name on hers. After lying in the narrow bunk with her curled against his side, Silas stared at the ceiling and tried to process how completely his life had changed in less than a day. Yesterday, he'd been a salvager scraping by on auction finds and part sales. Now, he was a fugitive, running from one of the most powerful corporations in known space, harboring the last member of an extinct species who possessed proof that would rewrite human history. And he'd never felt more alive. "I love you," Kyra whispered against his chest. The words so quiet, he almost missed them. The declaration should have terrified him. They'd known each other less than a day. Love took time to grow, required trust, and shared experiences, and understanding built over months or years. This was insanity. Hormones and adrenaline and proximity creating false emotions that would fade with perspective. But when he looked down at her, saw the vulnerability in her eyes, the hope mixed with fear of rejection, he knew the truth that his heart had already accepted. "I love you too," he said, meaning it completely. She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise after an endless night. The next weeks blurred together in a haze of constant movement and careful planning. They hopped from station to station, never staying longer than a few hours, always one step ahead of corporate hunters. Silas cashed in every favor he'd accumulated over years of salvage work, trading goodwill for resources. New identities that would pass casual inspection. Clean ship registration under a dummy corporation. Access to secured networks where they could work without leaving traces. Kyra worked tirelessly, accessing databases and ancient records, compiling her evidence into packages that could be distributed across multiple platforms simultaneously. She showed him more images, more data, building an overwhelming case that humanity had once dominated the stars. Human structures on worlds that supposedly predated human spaceflight. Genetic markers in alien populations that had no evolutionary path except human intervention. Linguistic patterns suggesting common root languages derived from ancient earth tongues. Mathematical constants in alien architecture that matched human cultural principles. One night, while the wanderer drifted in a maintenance orbit around an unnamed moon, Kyra pulled up a three-dimensional map that made his breath catch. "Look at this," she said, excitement coloring her voice. The map showed human settlement patterns spreading from Earth in waves, each dated by archaeological evidence. The oldest wave was marked 70,000 years ago, spreading through the Orion Arm and into the Carina Arm. Later waves pushed into the Perseus Arm and beyond. "The oldest wave is from the last ice age on Earth," Silas said, studying the data. "We barely had fire then, barely had language. You had more than fire." Kyra zoomed in on a particular cluster of worlds. These planets show evidence of genetic engineering, terraforming, advanced agriculture. Someone gave early humans the tools to colonize the stars. Someone uplifted your species and sent you out into the galaxy. Who? That's what we need to find out. She pulled up another file. There's a vault on New Carthage. Velarian military, sealed before the planet burned. If I can access it, I'll have everything, full records, evidence, possibly even names of who orchestrated the cover-up after humanity's fall. New Carthage is deep in Alliance territory. Multiple security checkpoints, heavy naval presence. I know it'll be the most dangerous thing we've attempted. Everything we do is dangerous now. Kyra turned to face him, her violet eyes intense. But we're close, Silas. So close to understanding the full truth. Why humanity fell, who made you forget, and who's been working to keep you ignorant for 70,000 years. He studied her face, seeing the determination there, the need to finish what her people had started. She'd lost everything, her world, her species, her freedom, but she still fought for truth. How could he do less? Then let's go find some answers. They made their approach to New Carthage carefully, using the credentials Silas had bought from a forger on Terminus Station. The planet orbited a dying star, its cities built underground to escape the radiation that made the surface lethal. Security was tight, but focused on military threats, not a small civilian transport carrying fake mining permits. They docked at a commercial port in the southern hemisphere, their IDs accepted without question. The Port Authority was more concerned with cargo manifests and docking fees than passenger backgrounds. The vault was located in the old military district, accessible through maintenance tunnels that had been abandoned when the Velarian government relocated to a new planet after Valeria's destruction. Kyra led the way, her enhanced vision cutting through the darkness, following a mental map from military databases she'd accessed years ago. Here, she said, stopping before a door that looked like any other maintenance hatch. But when Silas examined it closely, he saw the subtle differences. Reinforced hinges, hardened materials, biometric locks that had survived decades of neglect. Kyra pressed her hand to the scanner. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the lock clicked, recognition protocols, accepting her genetic signature. It still knows me, she whispered. The door swung open silently, revealing stairs descending into deeper darkness. They climbed down carefully, Silas keeping one hand on his weapon. Every instinct screamed that this was too easy, that they were walking into a trap. But when they reached the bottom, what they found took his breath away. The vault stretched into darkness, rows upon rows of servers and data cores glowing with standby lights. Backup power systems had kept everything running for 30 years, waiting for someone to access the information stored within. Kyra moved through the maze with purpose, her three-fingered hands flying across terminals and interfaces. She knew exactly what she was looking for, where the most critical data would be stored. "This is it," she breathed, her voice tight with emotion. "Everything my people died to preserve." Silas watched the door while she worked, his pulse pounding in his ears. Minutes ticked by, each one feeling like an hour. Then, Silas, oh stars, Silas, you need to see this. He crossed to her side, keeping one eye on the entrance. The screen showed a document, its text rendered in both Velarian script and standard. Official seals from the United Earth government marked the header. Project Genesis. Classification: above top secret. Date: 72,847 BCE. Read it, Kyra urged. He did. And as he read, everything he thought he knew about human history shattered into fragments. Humanity hadn't evolved naturally on Earth. They'd been placed there, engineered and seeded by an ancient species called the architects who dominated the galaxy millions of years ago. The architects had given early humans genetic potential for intelligence, adaptability, and innovation that far exceeded natural evolution. The first true humans had been created 75,000 years ago. Within 3,000 years, they'd been given starships, advanced technology, the scientific knowledge to terraform worlds and engineer life. They'd spread across the galaxy like wildfire, founding colonies on hundreds of worlds, uplifting other species, building the foundations of what would eventually become the Alliance. For 5,000 years, humanity had dominated the stars. They'd been explorers, scientists, teachers. They'd shared their knowledge freely, helping dozens of species develop spaceflight and join the galactic community. Then something had gone catastrophically wrong. The records became fragmented here, corrupted by time or deliberately obscured. But Silas pieced together enough to understand the broad strokes. A war, a philosophical schism within humanity about their role in the galaxy. Factions that wanted to rule versus those who wanted to guide. Violence that escalated from ideological conflict to weapons of mass destruction. The architects had intervened forcibly. Humanity had been judged too dangerous, too aggressive despite their potential. So the architects had implemented a reset protocol. Technology stripped away. Genetic memory suppressed. Advanced knowledge erased from every database and archive. And humanity itself forcibly regressed, their populations reduced to scattered tribes on Earth, while orbital weapons ensured they couldn't rebuild. The rest of the galaxy had been given a choice: forget humanity's contribution and rebuild without them, or be regressed as well. They'd chosen survival, chosen to erase humanity from the historical record and pretend the achievements had been their own. For 70,000 years, Earth had been a prison. Humanity confined to a single world, their true legacy stolen, forced to rediscover every advance from scratch. And when they finally achieved spaceflight again, when they rejoined the galactic community, the other species had maintained the lie. Made humans believe they were newcomers, primitives, junior members learning from their betters. They stole everything from us, Silas said, his voice shaking with rage. Our history, our achievements, our legacy. And they made us thank them for letting us join what we built. Yes, Kyra pulled up more files, her expression grim. And the Alliance has been working to maintain that lie ever since. That's why Valeria burned. My people found evidence of humanity's true history and were preparing to publish it. So Vex and Hellion, operating under Alliance direction, destroyed us before the truth could spread. The corporations were just tools. The whole Alliance wanted you silenced. Yes, she looked at him. And they'll do the same to anyone else who tries to expose them. We need to release everything simultaneously, make it impossible to suppress. Flood every network, every database, every communication channel we can access. How long will it take to prepare? 10 minutes to compile everything into distributable packages. Then another 5 to upload and begin simultaneous release across 100 platforms. Do it. While she worked, Silas heard something that made his blood freeze. Footsteps in the corridor outside, moving with tactical precision. Multiple contacts, armed and approaching fast. Kyra, almost done. The door exploded inward in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. Vex Corporation security poured through, weapons raised and charged. But these weren't the typical corporate guards from the station. These were professionals, military trained and equipped with advanced armor and weapons. Step away from the terminal, their leader ordered, his voice distorted by his helmet speakers. Silas raised his hands, positioning himself between the soldiers and Kyra. She kept typing, her fingers moving frantically across the keys. I said step away. Just a few more seconds, Kyra muttered, her eyes locked on the screen. The leader aimed his weapon directly at her head, finger tightening on the trigger. Silas moved without thinking, putting himself in the line of fire. Wait, just move aside, human. This doesn't concern you. Like hell it doesn't. The leader's finger tightened. Silas closed his eyes, waiting for the impact that would end everything. It never came. He opened his eyes. The security team stood frozen, their expressions slack behind their visors, weapons lowered. Behind them, a figure emerged from the shadows, impossibly tall, maybe 8 feet, with skin that shifted like oil on water, refracting light in ways that made it hard to look at directly. An architect. Fascinating, it said, its voice resonating in frequencies that made Silas's bones vibrate. After all this time, humanity remembers. You, Kyra breathed, her hands freezing on the keys. You did this to them. We gave them everything, and they nearly destroyed the galaxy. The architect moved closer, its form unsettling to perceive directly, as if it existed slightly out of phase with normal space. We had no choice but to reset them. You had every choice. Silas's hands clenched into fists, rage overriding fear. You stripped away our history, our potential, everything we'd built. You imprisoned us on Earth for 70,000 years. Your potential was annihilation. The architect's eyes, if they were eyes, focused on him with intensity that felt like being examined under a microscope. Humanity was too young, too aggressive, too willing to use violence to solve disputes. You would have consumed everything, burned through the galaxy like a wildfire, until nothing remained but ash and regret. So you made us forget, made everyone forget. We saved you, and in doing so, saved everyone else. The architect gestured at the frozen security team with something that might have been a hand. But some among your species refuse to learn from the past. They seek power at any cost, suppressing truth to maintain control over others. Then help us, Kyra said, her voice steady despite the fear Silas could see in her eyes. Help us restore what was taken. Let humanity know what they were, what they could be again. The architect was silent for a long moment, its form shifting through colors that had no names. Upload complete, it said finally. Your data is spreading across the galactic network. Soon, all will know the truth that was hidden. Silas stared. You let us finish. Perhaps we were wrong. Perhaps 70,000 years was sufficient time for your species to mature. The architect began to fade, its form becoming translucent. Prove me right, Silas of Earth. Show me that humanity has learned from its mistakes. Show me that you deserve the legacy we took from you. Wait, Kyra called out. What happened? What did we do that made you imprison us? The architect paused in its fatting. You played God, it said simply. You created life without understanding the responsibility that entailed. You uplifted species before they were ready, gifted technology, without wisdom to guide its use. Your hubris nearly unmade everything we had built over millions of years. So we taught you humility through suffering. Then it was gone completely, vanished as if it had never existed. The security team collapsed like puppets with cut strings, unconscious but breathing. Their weapons powered down automatically, safety protocols engaging. Did that just happen? Silas asked, his voice unsteady. Yes. Kyra grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the exit. And we need to go before they wake up and remember why they came here. They ran through the tunnels, emerging into the city as alarms began to sound behind them. But something was different now. People in the corridors stared at their datapads and terminals, reading with expressions of shock and disbelief. The truth was spreading. The Wanderer lifted off as security ships scrambled to intercept. But this time, they weren't alone. Ships from a dozen species broke formation, refusing to fire on them. On the comms, messages flooded in support, disbelief, demands for answers, rage at the deception. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back. Months passed. The galaxy burned with debate and recrimination. Some denied the evidence, calling it fabrication and conspiracy. Others embraced it, demanding justice for 70,000 years of suppressed history. Human colonies found themselves suddenly at the center of everything, their history being rewritten in real time as archives opened and new evidence emerged daily. The alliance fractured along old fault lines, then reformed around new principles. Acknowledgement of the past, reparations for the lies, representation for all species based on contribution rather than seniority. The power structures that had dominated galactic politics for millennia crumbled as humans reclaimed their voice. Humanity's role changed overnight. No longer the newcomers struggling to prove themselves, but the forgotten founders finally acknowledged. Some humans handled the revelation well, embracing their restored legacy with grace. Others let it fuel arrogance and demands for special treatment that threatened to repeat the mistakes of the past. Silas and Kyra watched from a distance, their names famous, but their faces carefully hidden. They'd settled on a quiet world in the outer rim called Haven's Landing, where nobody asked too many questions and people valued privacy above all else. Their home was small but comfortable, built into a hillside overlooking a valley where earth flora had been successfully transplanted. Kyra had started a garden growing vegetables from seeds she'd bought at a market. Silas did occasional salvage work for locals who needed equipment repaired or old systems restored. "Do you think we did the right thing?" Kyra asked one evening, watching the sunset from their porch. Her hand rested on her stomach, where their child grew, a biological impossibility that existed anyway. The doctors called it a miracle. Silas called it proof that love could transcend any barrier. "Yes," he said without hesitation, pulling her close. "Truth is always worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Even when it breaks everything, the alliance will never be the same. Good, it was built on lies and exploitation. Better it breaks now and gets rebuilt on honesty." He kissed her temple, breathing in her scent. "Besides, people deserve to know. All people, not just humans. Everyone had a right to understand the real history." She leaned into him, content. "What now? What do we do with the rest of our lives? Now we live. We raise our daughter. We tend the garden and fix old ships and let someone else save the galaxy for a while." He placed his hand over hers, feeling the flutter of movement beneath. "I've done my part. We both have. Daughter, the scans weren't definitive. Daughter or son, I'm not picky. I just want them healthy." Kyra laughed, the sound like music carried on the wind. "I love you, Silas. I love you too." They sat together as the twin suns set, painting the sky in shades of amber and violet and gold. In the distance, ships passed overhead in their regular traffic patterns, carrying people and cargo and dreams across the stars that humanity had once dominated and would now share as equals. The galaxy would never be the same. The revelation had shattered comfortable lies and forced everyone to confront uncomfortable truths. But change, Silas had learned through painful experience, was often necessary. Growth required breaking old patterns and building new ones. Humanity had bought a cheap ship, and found salvation in its hull. Not just for one woman, but for an entire species' understanding of itself and its place in the cosmos. And in the end, that was worth every risk they'd taken, every danger they'd faced, every moment of fear and uncertainty. The child kicked, and Kyra gasped softly, her free hand moving to her stomach. Silas placed his hand over hers, feeling the strong flutter of new life. "She's strong," Kyra observed with maternal pride. "Of course she is. Look at her mother. Look at her father. She's got the best of both our species. And maybe the worst," Kyra said, but she smiled. Stubborn human determination combined with Velarian overthinking. "She'll be impossible." "Perfect, you mean?" Kyra turned to face him fully, her violet eyes serious. "Promise me something." "Anything." "Promise me we'll tell her everything. About where we came from, what we fought for. About how love can transcend species, and truth can change the galaxy. About sacrifice and courage, and standing up for what's right even when it costs everything." Silas pulled her into a kiss, pouring 4 years of loneliness, fear, love, struggle, and triumph into it. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, feeling her cool skin against his warmth. "I promise," he said with absolute conviction. "Every word, every truth, every lesson we learned." Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient dance, indifferent to the dramas of the species below who loved and fought and dreamed beneath their light. But for 2 people on a quiet world, those stars represented everything: history, destiny, and hope for a tomorrow built on truth rather than comfortable lies. Humanity had found its place among them, not as conquerors or subordinates, but as equals who'd earned their position through perseverance, sacrifice, and the courage to demand truth even when lies were easier. And it had all started with a Salvage pilot who'd heard a woman crying from inside a hull and chosen to answer when he could have walked away. That choice had changed everything. One decision, one moment of compassion had rippled outward to reshape the galaxy. Silas would never regret it, no matter what came next, because he'd found something in that pod worth more than all the salvage in the galaxy. He'd found love. He'd found purpose. He'd found a reason to fight for something bigger than himself. And in the end, wasn't that what every person searched for their entire lives?